Hello BookTube. This video is slightly different from anything I've done on my channel before, as it's not actually to do with anything to do with books per se. It's actually a sort of introduction to for a live stream that I'm going to be doing tomorrow with Stephen Stoppard at 6 PM UK time, where we're going to be discussing a scenario where the UK in 2050 sort of starts to re-establish itself on the world stage. And this video is going to be me introducing the changes that have happened to Britain in the period between 2024 and 2050, as well as the rest of the world, so that you can understand what we're going to be talking about when we actually do the live stream tomorrow. I'm going to be now for the rest of this video. I'm going to be looking on the right hand side at a Word document where I've got everything written out. Hopefully this shouldn't take too long. So first, the UK. From 2024 to 2029, the Labour government of Sir Keir Starmer goes from crisis to crisis and becomes the most unpopular government in living memory. At the same time, the Conservative Party leadership election is won by a candidate of the Tory right who takes the Conservatives in a firm rightward shift. In 2027, this causes a split within the Conservative Party, which sees the Wets, which is more sort of centre and liberal elements of the Conservative Party, leave the party and establish itself as a new party called the Progress Party. In reaction to this, the Conservatives, under its new leader, forms electoral pacts with Reform UK, the Unionist parties in Northern Ireland, particularly the Ulster Unionists, the Democratic Unionists and the traditional Unionist Voice, as also with the small left-wing party, the small Social Democratic Party called the Social Democrats, or the SDP. At the 2029 general election, Labour loses, and a coalition government of the Tories, Reform and the Northern Irish Unionists take power and they are known as the Unionist Coalition, or Unions for short. At this general election, the Progress Party is wiped out. The SDP gain a number of seats, and Labour, following the election, splits and eventually becomes the third party in British politics, with the SDP becoming the main party of opposition. From 2029 to 2050, the Unionists win each general election, and during the same period they carry out various policies and reforms that solve most of the issues the UK has in terms of economics and a lot of the social issues. And this means that by the late 2040s, the UK is an economically prosperous, politically stable country with a high trust society. However, there have been difficulties with Islamic terrorism and Irish Republican terrorism. I should say that when I say the various reforms here, I haven't gone into any detail with them because I don't want to sort of get bogged down in that. But whatever policies you think would get Britain to a state where it would be prosperous, politically stable, and have a high trust society, that's what's been done. So just to get that there. So now on to the rest of the world. The United States. During the second administration of Donald Trump from 2025 to 2030, the United States leaves the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the International Labour Organization and NATO, and begins to withdraw from a significant portion of the world stage, with the US focusing its foreign and defence policy on the Western Hemisphere, so North and South America, or North, South and Central America, as well as the Pacific and, to a degree, the Middle East, so that starts to be drawn back. This policy causes the dissolution of the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the International Labour Organization and NATO by 2040. The Republicans win successively the 2028, 2032, 2036, 2040, 2044 and 2048 presidential elections. This is because the Democrats, after losing the 2024 presidential election, start to split, and between the sort of corporate Democrats who keep hold of the party brand, and the progressives who who split away from the party and join forces with the Democratic Socialists of America and the Green Party to form the Progressive People's Party. And what happens is that every presidential election, the Progressive People's Party and the Democrats put up candidates, which splits the left-wing vote, and so the Republicans keep getting in, whilst at a congressional level, the Democrats and the People's Party both are able to win roughly the same amount of seats, but because of big disagreements between each other, they can rarely form an alliance. So during the period of 2025 to 2050, there are only short periods of time in which the House and the Senate are not in Republican control, when the Democrats and the Progressive People's Party are able to work together. That's good. And the US, because of its immense wealth and immense natural resources, is able to survive on its own, and is reasonably prosperous, and is reasonably politically stable. However, it has had some difficulties with far left terrorism in places like California and Oregon during this period. Now, the West Indies. Due to the outbreak of the Second Chinese Civil War, we'll come to that when we get to China, the economies of the West Indies were hard hit, and this has led to instability across the region. In 2032, there is a pro-Russian palace coup in Cuba, which cements the country as a Russian ally, and during the course of the 2030s and 2040s, the region becomes a political battleground between various forces, notably among them the United States and Russia. Now, Mexico. From the late 2020s to the early 2030s, Mexico's political instability increases, with the more stable areas of the country, notably the Yucatan, demanding more power from the central government, as they feel they can look after themselves better than Mexico City can. And then in 2036, the Mexican Civil War breaks out, with following a series of massive attacks by the cartels to undermine the election. The Civil War carries on throughout the rest of the 2030s into the 2040s, very much similar to the way that the Mexican Revolution took place in the early part of the 20th century. And this Civil War consists of a fight between the Mexican government, the cartels, both left-wing and right-wing militias, as well as secessionist groups. The most notable secessionist group is the Yucatan, which is able to secede from Mexico and become an independent republic by 2038 with the aid of the United States. And in the early 2040s, the Mexican government recognises the independence of the Yucatan. And throughout this civil war, the United States has made periodic interventions to defend American interests in the region, in the country. Now, Central America. During the late 2020s and throughout the 2030s, the United States has supported pro-American governments taking power in Central America, and the region has become stable and also economically prosperous because of heavy American investment in the region. South America. South America, like the Caribbean, has become a battleground between the US and Russia for influence from the 2030s onwards. Now, Europe, or more particularly the EU. In 2027, Marine Le Pen wins the French presidential election, which leads France to leave the EU in 2032. During the 2030s, the EU undergoes a rapid change into a two-speed Europe, whilst a number of countries follow the French out of the organisation. These countries include Spain, Portugal, Sweden, Croatia, Romania and Bulgaria. The two-speed Europes are split between Speed 1, which is the inner core of the EU, which is highly integrated and is on a fast track to becoming a United States of Europe. This consists of Germany, Austria and Czechia. Speed 2 Europe is the outer group of the EU who want to remain in the EU but don't want to become part of a sort of United States of Europe. This group consists of Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark, Slovakia, Slovenia, Italy, Greece, Ireland, Cyprus, Malta and the Baltic states. Now, the opposition to joining the United States of Europe is various. For example, in this United States of Europe is very much a Republican form of government, which sort of causes a great deal of resistance from the Belgians, the Dutch and the Luxembourgers from joining, as well as the Danish. And also, it's very much a neoliberal project, which sort of causes the more left-wing elements, more left-wing groups in this country. So, for example, in Greece, the socialist government really doesn't want to join this organisation, but doesn't want to leave the EU. So that's the situation for their opposition. Now, following the dissolution of NATO in 2035 and the Russian annexation wars in the late 2030s, I'll come to that when we come to Russia, the EU ceased to exist as a single organisation. Speed 1 Europe becomes the European Federation in 2040, while Speed 2 Europe members either stand on their own, establish their own factions, or they either become standalone, they either become their own factions, become neutral, or join another faction. So Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland form the Nordic Union, which is very much a sort of federal union similar to the European Federation that's been formed, but very much based on those countries and then their shared identity. Romania and Bulgaria become Russian allies. Greece, Italy, Malta, and Cyprus declare neutrality. The Republic of Ireland is neutral but has become increasingly unstable and is in economic depression throughout the 2030s and 2040s, which has also been the instabilities caused by the sort of current difficulties we're seeing in Ireland over the issue of immigration, and also the rise of Irish Republican terrorism in the south, sort of provoked by not sort of provoked, but going along with that sort of present difficulties with immigration, which in this scenario have only increased. Portugal and Spain are allied to the UK and France. Hungary and Slovakia have formed an alliance, and the Hungarians have restored the monarchy with the Habsburgs. The Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Benelux have formed the The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg have formed the Benelux Federation. Again, sort of federal system, was similar to the EU, but on a small scale and a bit more integrated. And they are trying, and the Benelux Federation is trying to balance itself between the French and the European Federation. Now, to move south into the Balkans. During the early 2030s, the Russians orchestrate a coup in Montenegro, which sees the country reunite with Serbia under a union as Great Serbia, with the Serbians very much in control. In 2036, the Serbians invade Kosovo and annex it, following the dissolution of NATO and the withdrawal of NATO troops from Kosovo. And this provokes a war with Albania, which sees Albania defeated and northern Albania annexed by this Greater Serbia. This then provokes in turn the Greeks to invade the southern areas of Albania, which are populated by the Greeks, by ethnic Greeks, which are annexed. Then during the early 2040s, the Serbians form a temporary alliance with the Greeks and Bulgarians to partition Macedonia into between the areas occupied by the various ethnic groups. At the same time, Islamicists take over the Bosnian Muslim areas of Bosnia-Herzegovina. These have been funded by Iran. We'll come to what's going on in the Middle East soon. And this in turn provokes the Serbians to annex the Serb areas of Bosnia, and then that in turn provokes the Croatians to annex the Croat areas of Bosnia. This provokes the outbreak of the second Bosnian War in 2045, and this continues throughout the rest of the decade. At the same time, there is increased tension between the Hungarians, the Serbians, and the Romanians due to the presence of Hungarian minorities in those countries. As all these tensions are continuing, there is a growing tension between Greece and Turkey over Cyprus and Eastern Thrace, and in both those situations it looks like there's going to be a war sometime in the 2050s. Now on to Russia. During the second Trump administration, Western aid is cut off from Ukraine, and this cut causes the fall of Ukraine to Russia by 2026, which is followed by the Russians invading and annexing Moldova in 2027 along with Transnistria. In 2028, Belarus is willingly annexed by Russia. Then in 2030, Vladimir Putin dies of natural causes, and then Russia goes into a limited civil war, mainly around Moscow, which sees an alliance between the Russian military and the Russian communists taking power and establishing Russia as a sort of neo-Soviet state. Throughout the 2030s, this neo-Soviet Russia mainly concentrates on building this neo-Soviet state in Russia, with the exception of the invasions of the Baltic states between 2035 and 2036. As soon as NATO dissolved, the Russians launched their invasions, and they quickly overall the Baltic states and then annex them. And then during the 2040s, the Russians bribe or bully all the other ex-Soviet states into rejoining the newly established Soviet Union. Now I'm just going to move on to the last sort of European element of the of this, because I've actually forgot to put this in, which is that Poland, when the EU ceases to exist, starts to stand on its own and forms alliances with the Nordic Union, and also with and tries to get help from the Americans, but that's not much good. So they form a bit of an alliance with the French, and are very much militaristic and concerned about the growing strength of Russia, and and then eventually when it comes to the re-established Soviet Union, and also the European Federation, which is very much German dominated, and the Polish have long memories of this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and really don't want to see that started on them again. Now, to move on to the Middle East. The Israeli war with Gaza and Hezbollah during the late 2020s expands into a full-blown regional war. Lebanon collapses into a second civil war, with the Iranian-backed Syrians invading to support Hezbollah, and the Israelis invading to support the Christians in Lebanon, and establishing a satellite state in southern Lebanon, which is a very much Christian-run state. At the same time, the Turks use this as an opportunity to invade northwest Syria and support forces there, and that in turn provokes the Syrian Kurds to rise up with the support of the Israelis and the Iraqi Kurds. Then in 2029, the war expands into Turkey itself when the Kurds there rise up with the support of the Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds and the Israelis. This is followed by the Jordanians being drawn into the war the following year, when the Syrians attempt to launch an invasion of Israel through a north western corner of Jordan. By 2035, the Kurds have successfully forced the Turks out of most of Turkish Kurdistan, and done the same to the Syrians in Syrian Kurdistan, which leads to the establishment of the Republic of Kurdistan. This brings Iraq into the war and collapses it into civil war between the Kurds, pro-Iranian forces, and Jordanian-backed forces. During the late 2030s, the Turks are forced out of Syria, but the Syrians are unable to do anything about the Kurds at this point. In 2040, the war ends in a stalemate and a truce, with the recognition of the partition of Lebanon, the recognition of Kurdistan, the acceptance of the pre-war Syrian-Jordanian border, and the recognition of the Jordanian supported state in the rump of what is now Iraq. The Gulf states and Oman have become increasingly worried due to the situation by the growth of Iran, and so they have looked for support. They remain pro-Western, but they are willing to, at one remove, to work with the Israelis through the Kurds and the Jordanians. Now, at the same time, the Saudi Arabians have attempted to modernise, and the royal family continues to control the country, but there's been increasing pressure from below, demanding reform, and the country's future looks very unstable. At the same time, in Iran, the war has taken a great toll on them, both in material terms and in economic terms, and the sort of increasing protest from the population, increasing protests by the population, have continued with greater pressure over the course of the 2030s into the 2040s, but they are just about keeping control. Yemen has collapsed into a patchwork of warlords backed by various countries. During the 2040s, the Iraqi rump state restores the Hashemite monarchy and then enters into a custom, trade and financial union with Jordan. The Jordanian royal family are the Hashemites, or also Hashemites, I should say. At the same time, the Jordanians formalise their alliance with the Gulf states and Oman into what's called the Amman Pact, whilst the Israelis form an alliance with the Kurds, who also joined the Amman Pact, and this means that those two alliances are joined at one remove, are allied at one remove via the Kurds. The Iranians form an unofficial alliance with the Turks as they see the Turks as a good ally to use against the Kurds in a future war, because Iran has its own Kurdistan, and they're somewhat concerned that the Kurds might take that. Now, Afghanistan. The Taliban regime remains in power from the 2020s to 2040s, with links to Pakistan, but with an increasingly hostile relationship to Russia and Iran. This hostility only increases in the mid-2030s when there are revolts in northern and western Afghanistan backed by the Iranians and Russians. These revolts, combined with the increased hostility, lead to the outbreak of a all-out war between Afghanistan and Iran in 2045. Just wait a second. And this sees Iran and the Taliban bogged down into a war that by 2050 neither of them seem to be able to win, but neither can give up. Now we move on to Africa. Due to the strong measures taken by European countries over the issue of migration, migration from Africa is largely halted, but this causes a great deal of instability within Africa itself, because you have the combination of a booming youth population with no sort of steam valve of migration north, combined with less than desirable governments, and this in turn causes a wave of revolutions, wars, and stronger military governments across the continent. Countries like South Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo collapse. South Africa splits into a state in the Cape, a state in Natal Zululand, and the rest of the country is just a patchwork of warlords or just chaos. The Congo becomes a war zone for both local factions and neighbouring countries. Egypt and Sudan in the 2030s fight a war with Ethiopia over the Nile. The Ethiopians bring the Renaissance Dam up to full force, and this reduces the Nile river's flow, which affects the Egyptians' economy and that of Sudan. But the Ethiopians are able to reasonably fight this war and win it, and this forces the Egyptians. This causes a great amount of economic difficulty for Egypt, which is forced to rely on international loans and sort of hardline repressive measures to keep the country together. Sudan collapses into civil war, which then engulfs South Sudan, and this is continuing well into the 2040s. Now China. During the late 2020s, China suffers economic difficulties, which provokes them into an attempted invasion of Taiwan in 2013. Militarily, this invasion is a complete and utter failure. Economically and politically, the invasion is completely disastrous. On the international stage, Iran is subject to an embargo, as well as pretty much a blockade, thanks to the Americans, of a naval blockade, pretty much, which causes an economic collapse, and that in turn causes massive unrest across China. This unrest quickly escalates into a multi-faction civil war, which by 2040 sees the Communist Party only controlling the northeast of the country, and the rest of the country has effectively formed into different factions, and some of the areas of the country have become separate, themselves separate countries. So Tibet, for example, becomes a separate country. And the Russians have annexed areas of East Turkmenistan. And so by 2045, the northeast part of China, controlled by the Communist Party, has become a puppet of Russia. And this leads to the Russians negotiating an end of the war, where the Chinese communists are forced to accept the loss of this territory. Among the newly established states is Hong Kong, which has become independent and has become a Commonwealth realm within the Commonwealth of Nations. So it has the British monarch as their monarch. Also, Taiwan has taken the advantage of the Civil War to expand its control, its political control to the Chinese mainland, and is very much pressing its claim as being the continuation of the Chinese Republic, which existed from 1911, I should say, to 1949. Now, India. India itself is becoming quite economically, is continuing to advance economically, is quite stable. It has succeeded in taking advantage of the Chinese by helping establish Tibet as a state, which also becomes effectively a Chinese effective Indian protectorate. This, however, has led to a end of the Russo-Indian alliance, because the Russians regard this as an intervention into an area of the world they very much regard as somewhere they were going to make advances. Now, in Bangladesh, throughout the 2020s and 2030s, from the 2020s to 2040s, Bangladesh has been facing an increasingly difficult problem with Islamic fundamentalists, which eventually breaks out into a civil war in the late 2040s, and the Indians look set to intervene and support the Bangladeshi government. Throughout the 2020s and 2030s, Sri Lanka continues to be politically and economically unstable, with tensions growing between different political factions, as well as between the Sri Lankans and the Tamils. This sort of explodes into an agrarian insurgency in 2039, and that then sets off a chain of events which produces a multi-faction civil war, which includes the government, the Tamils rising up again, the agrarians, the communists, and the Islamicists. Now, ending on this is the final part of the scenario. In the Far East, with the outbreak of the Second Chinese Civil War, China's neighbours take advantage of the Civil War by backing various factions within the Civil War, due to its reliance on Chinese and Russian aid. North Korea effectively becomes a Russian puppet, and following a Russian-backed coup in 2046, North Korea unites with the rump of communist China. Whereas the Chinese allies in the Far East either search for another great power ally or become neutral whilst trying to keep their countries from collapsing under the loss of Chinese investment in their economies, which is quite significant. And also, economically speaking, the global economy takes a number of hits throughout this period, understandably so, with the war in the Middle East, the Chinese Civil War, the various other wars going on. However, areas like the UK, Europe, mainland sort of Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and places like Singapore and so on are able to prosper, and they become extremely wealthy. And they have been able to, particularly through reindustrialisation, create booming economies. So the British economy at this point in 2050, it has produced a amount of wealth which means that a working class family can survive on a single income, run a car, and also take one foreign holiday a year. So this is sort of the situation the UK is in 2050, and the way the world is in 2050. And in tomorrow's live stream, myself and Stephen are going to discuss how the UK can take advantage of the situation in terms of foreign policy and promote British interests in this world that I've created in this scenario. So with that, BookTube, I'll say goodbye, and I will see you tomorrow at 6 p.m.